Pattern Shop, and today I'll be showing you how to sew a pair of children's rain pants. We're going to be sewing the bib option today. This pattern also includes an option for just a basic pant that ends at the waist, has optional patch pockets for the chest of the bibs, and then you can also add them to the side of the pant leg. I didn't do that on this pair, but it is an option. These have adjustable straps. I'll be going over in the video how to add seam sealing tape if that's something you want to do to make these fully waterproof. And then this pattern also has elastic at the ankles and then optional this stirrup elastic to keep the pants down over the boots. Let's go ahead and get started. The first step is to sew your two pant pieces together along the center front seam. This is the edge with the notches. My legs are down here. So this is the seam that will be up on the chest. And I'm gonna clip my seam allowance along the curve. And then I'm gonna show you how to seal this seam so that it's completely waterproof. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. I don't find that a ton of water gets in through seams, but you can use, I have this seam sealing tape that I'm going to show you how to use. I know they also make like a paint on that comes with a little brush, and you just paint it like into the seam. So let's go see how to use this seam sealing tape. So I've got the seam sealing tape. I just got this off Amazon. Got my iron. I have, this is a Teflon like press cloth so that the tape doesn't stick to it. I also tried just with a scrap of paper and that worked. I tried using just like a cotton press cloth because the seam sealing tape said that would work. That did not work at all. My tape stuck right to my press cloth. So don't try that. But I did have luck with paper. I'm gonna use this like Teflon sheet. So the first thing you're gonna do is practice on a scrap. You don't wanna ruin your project. So I already have this one sealed. This is the one I pressed with my Teflon sheet, and this is the one I did with the paper. They both work. I tested this out in the sink, ran some water over it, nothing got through. So now I'm ready to move on to my actual project. So you wanna spread your seam out so it's flat. And like this is not gonna stay very well since it's soft shell, which is kind of bulky. And then I'm gonna just work in kind of small sections because I don't want to try and deal with too much of this at a time. So I'm cutting off, I don't know, maybe about 9 inches of this. And I'm not sure if this matters or not. One side of mine is a little more glossy, and I think that's the side that needs to go against the fabric, at least on the tape I bought. That's the side that's like against the roll. That's the way I've tried it and that worked, so I'm gonna stick with that. So I'm just gonna put that down on top of my fabric. You can see why you wouldn't wanna do too big of a length at once. And I'm just gonna cover it up and press. Probably gonna have to get this other section later. I might wanna work on even smaller segments. And you can just kind of lift it up and see if it looks like it's sealing. So I can tell that that has melted to my fabric. You don't want to press too long, or I think the tape can like completely melt, at least from what I read on the Amazon reviews for this. Which is why you want to practice on a scrap. So just press for a little bit, lift up and check, and like if you get a little off center, like that's okay, it's not a huge deal. So I've got that section done. So then I'm just gonna move down, cut a new piece. I'll show you how to do the curve and then I'll finish up the rest of this straight on my own. So you definitely need to have the curve clipped, or you can see it would be like impossible to get this flattened out. So I'm just going to cut a fairly small piece here to get me just through this curved section. Okay, so I've got the more shiny side face down. Check on that. Okay, so this still feels like a little sticky. I don't think it's been pressed quite long enough, so I'm going to press it just a little longer, make sure it's fully bonded on there. Okay, so I've got that done through the curve, and then I'm just going to finish up with, I need one more piece along here. I'm ready to sew my pockets. I've got my main pocket piece and two pocket flat pieces. Since I'm using soft shell, I used a lighter weight fabric for the lining of the flap, just so it's not bulky. So these are going to get sewn together with right sides together and leaving this top edge open. And then on the main pocket, I need to fold all these edges over 1/2 inch. If you're using a fabric that will hold a press, you can press it. Mine does not hold a press at all. So I'm actually going to use a glue stick. It's just a washable kids glue stick. Press this over 1/2 inch. Just going to hold it down with a clip too. Okay, I've got all my edges pressed, and I'm going to go sew across the top edge. We'll sew the sides when we're actually attaching it to the rain pants. The pocket flap pieces are sewn together. I'm going to trim down my seam allowance and then turn this right side out. So you want to press this flat. I'm just going to use my fingers. It's my soft shell. It isn't really a fabric I can press. And then you'll top stitch along the finished edge of the flap. And we're ready to attach our main pocket piece. I've hemmed the top edge already. So I'm going to attach this one to the center front. The pattern also has markings for on the leg. So if you're doing it on the leg, I didn't mark that because I wasn't planning to, but you could have like a side pocket here. I'm going to do this one on the center front. If you haven't already sealed your seam, if you wanted to do that, you need to do it before you put the pocket on. It'll just be easier. So I'm going to match this up with the markings from my pattern, the top two corners. And then I don't want to pin it because I don't want to stick a bunch of holes in my fabric and lose the waterproofing. Some of my glued edges don't 100% stay down, and I'm just going to have to kind of hold them down as I sew, but I'll go ahead and glue edges as best as I can. Center this over that seam. And I'm going to top stitch this down. So I'm going to get my corners squared away here. And if you absolutely need to pin it, you can go ahead and pin it. But if you can get by without pins, that's the best option. The main pocket is sewn onto my front piece. I did end up having to use a few pins to hold it down, so don't feel bad if you need to use a few pins. I'm ready to sew on the pocket flap, so I'm gonna use a little bit of glue here on the top edge and lay this down 1/2 inch above the top of my pocket. And then I'm gonna go sew this in place. Sew this in place using 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm gonna trim this down to 1/8 of an inch now. Just trimming my pocket flap. Now I'm gonna fold this down and top stitch 1/4 inch below the folded edge, and that'll completely enclose this raw edge. And then if you want, you can add snaps to the corner or to the middle, or you can just leave it without a snap. The main pocket and flap are now attached to the front piece. You can see how that seam ended up getting fully enclosed. You can add your snap if you want to. If you were adding pockets to the legs, those should be sewn on as well. And then we're gonna move on to the center back seam. So this is the one without the notch. One of the main reasons I like to include a pocket on the front is just to make these easy to tell front from back for little kids. All right, so I'm gonna go sew this, and then I'm gonna add the same seam sealing tape that I did on the front. The center back seam is sewn, and I added my seam sealing tape. So we're ready to sew at the inseam. You'll match up your center front and back, and then just keep pinning all the way down the legs, and then we'll go sew this up in one continuous seam, and then we'll get it sealed. The inseam is sewn. I can't fit my pant leg over my ironing board, so I'm just gonna have my pants inside out and just spread it out so the seam's in the middle. I'm just gonna do the same thing as before, working kind of small sections. I'd actually try leaving my tape long, but only pressing a little section at a time. We'll see how that goes. Kind of a learning curve to this. This is my first time using the seam sealing tape, and so far I think it's going pretty well. All sealed, and I was able to do it in one go, just unrolling it as I went. The trickiest spot is right here, and it doesn't look perfect, but I think I did a pretty good job of it. You will notice there was one little spot I accidentally nicked with my iron, and that melted like right away. So make sure you've got something in between your iron and the tape. I've turned pants right side out. I'm ready to start working on my hardware. So I've got 2 buckles, 2 sliders. I have 2 short pieces of webbing and 2 longer pieces. The pattern has a suggested length for all of those. I'm gonna heat seal the ends of my webbing by just running a lighter over it. I'm gonna use the short ends of my webbing on this piece of the buckle that doesn't have the like adjustable strap option. So this is the right side of my buckle and this is the wrong side. It's kind of hard to tell, but just check your buckle, see which side looks like the front, and you're going to want to lay it right side down. And I'm going to leave 1 inch of webbing hanging off the end of my fabric. And I'm going to sew that in place with my regular 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm lining this up with the notch on the top of the bib. This is the front. And then a nice long webbing tail. And then on the back, the first thing we need to do is attach our strap to the middle bar of the slide piece. So I'm going to loop this around and then I'm going to use a zipper foot to sew it on, just because otherwise it's going to be really hard to get very close. And since it's heat sealed, I'm not worried about it fraying. You can tuck the edge under once if you want to. I sewed on the front buckles. Make sure you leave that webbing tail on. We'll deal with that later. And I've got this sewn onto the middle of the slide piece. So now I'm going to take the other end and come through the very bottom opening of the buckle back up. And then I'm going to go through the bottom of the slide adjuster and out through the top. So now I've got my Now that the straps are attached, it's time to do our facing. So I already sewed the short ends together with right sides together. And then I finished the bottom edge of my facing with a serger because my fabric frays. If you're using something that doesn't fray, you can just leave it raw. Since I'm using soft shell for my outer layer, I used a lightweight water repellent for my facing so that it's not too bulky. So the notch goes in the front. This facing looks, you know, symmetrical, but it's not 100% symmetrical. So make sure you're matching up the front with the front of your bibs here. And then match up the back on the other side. I did not seal these seams since they're on the inside of the pants. You could if you wanted to though. Okay. And I'm gonna keep pinning this in place. Still have your strap tails sticking out and don't cut those off. So we're gonna use a sewing machine for this step. Don't use a serger. right, got the whole facing pinned and I'm ready to go sew this on using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. The facing is sewn on. I'm gonna clip my seam allowance on these inward curves. Since my soft shell is kind of bulky, I'm gonna trim just the soft shell seam allowance along my top corners. Just help the seam lay a little better. I'm not gonna cut my strap, leave that there. Okay, I'm ready to turn this facing to the inside of the pants. And since I can't really press this fabric, I'm just gonna do the best I can with my fingers, and then I'm gonna hold it in place with some clips. And then I'm gonna go top stitch along this edge. So I'm going to keep pinning this in place all the way around, and then I'm going to top stitch along the top edge, and then I'm going to top stitch along the bottom of my facing, so about 1 1/4 inch below the top edge, and then I'm going to sew a square and do a diagonal line through, do like a barn door stitching pattern on the end of each strap. So my straps are fully inside my facing, but I'm just going to top stitch those down to make sure they really stay put. I folded up the bottom edge of the pants 1 inch, and I left a gap for threading the elastic through. Got that attached to a safety pin, so I'm ready to feed it through my casing. Once I have that pulled through, I'm just going to overlap the ends 1/2 inch and sew them together. Okay, so I'm going to pull that so my elastic's fully inside the pant, and then I can top stitch this gap shut. I'm adding buttons to the inside of the pant legs so that I can add the optional elastic. This is buttonhole elastic, goes under the kids like rain boot, and that way the pants can't ride up. So I folded over the ends of the elastic twice and sewed it down so it doesn't fray. So I've got my elastic piece ready. I have 1 button sewn on by the inseam, and then just straight across from that I'm sewing on the 2nd button. I'm using my sewing machine to sew on the buttons because it's pretty hard to sew through the soft shell just by hand. So I'm using my buttonhole foot and a zigzag stitch with the length set to 0. You want to crank by hand a couple times just to make sure you have your settings right. You can adjust the width if you need to. So leave a long tail, and then you'll take a sewing needle to thread these tails back through to the inside and then just knot it off. After the buttons are sewn on to the inside of the pants, you can just hook your buttonhole elastic on here, and it can come off completely if you don't want to use it on a particular day. You'll want to undo at least one side when you're putting on boots, because it would be pretty hard to pull it on with it hooked on both sides. So unhook at least one side, pull the pants on, get the rain boots on, pull the pants down over the rain boots so you don't get any rain in there, and then you'll put this under the boot and hook it back on the other side. And then your rain pants are all finished up.